The modern man stands at a crossroads unlike any in history, where previous generations could reasonably expect to build families, own homes, and achieve financial stability through hard work. Today's landscape tells a different story. The dream that once seemed like a universal birthright has become an exclusive privilege, accessible only to those born into wealth or willing to mortgage their futures to unthinkable degrees. We've entered an era where the traditional markers of success, marriage, property ownership, financial independence are being systematically pulled out of reach for ordinary people, while being flaunted as attainable by those who control the levers of economic power. This isn't accidental. It's by design. The system has been carefully calibrated to keep the majority chasing scraps while the elite consolidate their advantages. But here's the fundamental truth they don't want you to realize. This isn't about capability or worth. It's about control. They need you to believe you're powerless, because the moment you realize your true potential, their house of cards collapses. Consider the psychological toll this engineered disparity takes. Young men today are coming of age in a world that offers them no clear path to traditional fulfillment, while simultaneously mocking them for failing to achieve it. The result? A generation increasingly disconnected from purpose, from community, from hope. The statistics paint a grim picture. Rising suicide rates, plummeting marriage rates, an epidemic of loneliness. These aren't personal failures. They're systemic features. The modern economy has been structured to extract maximum value from workers, while giving back the bare minimum, creating a permanent underclass of indebted, isolated individuals too exhausted to demand better. But this isn't a call to despair. It's a call to arms. Because history shows us repeatedly that when enough people wake up to their collective power, systems change. The question isn't whether change is possible, it's whether you're willing to be part of making it happen. The first step in breaking free is recognizing the illusion for what it is. The narrative that you must accept this diminished existence is a lie. A powerful one, certainly reinforced by media, by politicians, by the very structure of our daily lives, but a lie nonetheless. Look beyond the surface and you'll find countless examples of individuals who refuse to play by the established rules and create their own paths to success. These aren't supernatural beings or lucky lottery winners. They're ordinary people who made extraordinary choices. They're people like Howard Schultz, who grew up in Brooklyn housing projects watching his father struggle with blue-collar jobs and medical bills, only to build Starbucks into a global empire. Or Oprah Winfrey, born into poverty in rural Mississippi, who transformed herself into one of the most influential media figures in history. Their stories matter not because they're exceptional, but because they prove what's possible when someone refuses to accept the limitations others try to impose on them. The tools for transformation are more accessible today than ever before. While the traditional paths to prosperity may be eroding, new opportunities are emerging that bypass the old gatekeepers entirely. The internet has democratized access to information, to markets, to global audiences. Skills that once required expensive formal education can now be acquired for free or at minimal cost. Geographic barriers to opportunity are crumbling as remote work becomes normalized. The playing field isn't level yet, but it's leveling in ways that would have been unimaginable just a generation ago. This is the paradox of our moment. Never have so many felt so hopeless, while never have so many tools for self-determination been so readily available. The disconnect isn't in reality, it's in perception, carefully cultivated by those who benefit from maintaining the status quo. What separates those who break free from those who remain trapped isn't luck or innate talent. It's mindset, specifically the willingness to question everything you've been taught about how the world works and your place in it. The courage to define success on your own terms rather than accepting society's narrow definitions. The persistence to keep pushing when every obstacle suggests you should quit. These qualities can't be outsourced or shortcut. They must be cultivated through deliberate practice and conscious choice. This is where true power lies, not in waiting for external circumstances to change, but in changing your relationship to those circumstances. When you stop seeing yourself as a victim of forces beyond your control and start seeing yourself as an active agent in shaping your destiny, everything changes. The same challenges remain, but your capacity to meet them transforms entirely. Asterisk, the journey begins with brutal honesty. Where are you currently compromising? What dreams have you abandoned because they seemed impractical? What aspects of your life are being dictated by fear rather than aspiration? This introspection isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. Most people sleepwalk through their lives, making incremental concessions to practicality until one day they wake up wondering where their passion went. Don't let that be you. The time to reclaim your agency is now, not when conditions are perfect. They never will be. Start small if you must, but start. Learn that skill you've been putting off. Reach out to that person who inspires you. Take that first concrete step toward the life you actually want rather than the one you've settled for. Momentum builds on itself, and each small victory makes the next one easier to achieve. This isn't about unrealistic positivity or denying the very real structural barriers that exist. It's about recognizing that within whatever constraints you face, you still have more power than you're being led to believe. The system wants you passive and pessimistic because that's how it maintains control. Your rebellion begins the moment you choose to believe otherwise and back that belief with action. The crisis of average isn't inevitable. It's engineered. And anything engineered can be reverse engineered. The question is, will you be among those who dare to try? The most powerful weapon in breaking free from societal constraints isn't money, connections, or even education, though those certainly help. It's mindset. Specifically, what psychologists call an internal locus of control, the fundamental belief that your actions matter, that you're the primary author of your life's narrative, rather than a passive character buffeted by external forces. This distinction separates those who shape their destinies from those who feel shaped by them. Consider Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, who turned $5,000 in savings into a billion-dollar empire while facing constant rejection and skepticism. Her journey wasn't about avoiding obstacles. It was about developing the mental resilience to persist through them. She didn't wait for permission or perfect conditions. She created her opportunity by refusing to accept no as the final answer. This is the essence of the transformational mindset, the understanding that between stimulus and response, there's always a space for choice. And in that space lies your power. Modern society actively works to shrink that space of autonomy. From algorithms dictating what we see and think to economic pressures keeping us in survival mode, countless forces conspire to make us reactive rather than proactive. The result? A population that feels increasingly powerless despite living in an age of unprecedented opportunity. This isn't accidental. Dependent people are easier to control. Compliant consumers are more profitable than independent thinkers. The entire attention economy is built on keeping us distracted, anxious, and just comfortable enough not to risk real change. Breaking free requires recognizing these mechanisms for what they are, sophisticated traps designed to harvest our time, energy, and potential. The moment you see the trap clearly is the moment you can begin dismantling it. The transformation begins with how you allocate your most precious resource, attention. Every minute spent doom scrolling or consuming mindless entertainment is a minute not spent building your future. This isn't about moralizing. It's about recognizing that your attention is the currency of your liberation. When Jack May founded Alibaba in 1999, he did so with a clear vision despite having no technical background, limited English, and facing numerous failures beforehand. His advantage wasn't resources but focus, the ability to tune out naysayers and maintain unwavering belief in his vision. In today's hyper-distracted world, this quality of focused attention has become rare and therefore extraordinarily valuable. The person who can consistently direct their attention toward meaningful creation rather than passive consumption gains an almost unfair advantage. Closely tied to attention is environment. We dramatically underestimate how profoundly our surroundings shape our thoughts, behaviors, and ultimately our outcomes. The people you surround yourself with, the media you consume, the physical spaces you inhabit, all these either pull you toward your potential or push you away from it. Tony Robbins often speaks about the power of proximity, how simply being around high achievers can elevate your own performance. This explains why geographic mobility remains one of the most reliable predictors of economic success. Those willing to physically position themselves where opportunity thrives dramatically increase their chances of catching its wave. But environment isn't just physical. In our digital age, your virtual environment, the voices you allow into your mental space through screens, may matter even more. Curating these inputs with intention is among the highest leverage actions. You can take that at the core of every success story lies an often overlooked factor: tolerance for discomfort. Modern life offers endless ways to numb ourselves, from substance abuse to compulsive shopping to binge watching. These aren't just bad habits. They're barriers to growth. Every meaningful achievement requires passing through phases of frustration, uncertainty, and outright failure. The ability to lean into these discomforts rather than avoid them separates those who realize their potential from those who don't. Consider the story of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who went from being cut from the Canadian Football League and having just $7 in his pocket to becoming one of the most recognizable figures in entertainment. His turnaround began when he stopped running from rock bottom and started building from it. This pattern repeats endlessly among high achievers, not because suffering is noble, but because developing the capacity to endure it unlocks possibilities that remain invisible to those seeking only comfort. Perhaps the most subversive mindset shift is rejecting the scarcity narrative we've been sold. The idea that there's only so much success to go around, that someone else's gain must be your loss. This zero-sum thinking keeps people competing for crumbs rather than creating new pies. The truth? Wealth and opportunity aren't finite resources. They're created through innovation, collaboration, and value creation. When Jeff Bezos started Amazon in his garage, he wasn't taking business away from others. He was creating an entirely new economic ecosystem that would generate millions of jobs and enable countless other businesses to thrive. This abundance mindset doesn't ignore real inequalities, but it recognizes that the most reliable path to changing them lies in creation rather than redistribution. The internet has amplified this truth exponentially. Today, a single person with a laptop can create value at scale that would have required factory-sized infrastructure just a generation ago. The final piece of the mindset revolution is what author Stephen Pressfield calls turning pro, the decision to show up consistently regardless of inspiration or circumstance. Amateurs wait for motivation. Professionals create regardless of how they feel. This discipline is the bedrock upon which all other success factors rest. It's what allowed J.K. Rowling to write Harry Potter while on welfare as a single mother. What enabled Stephen King to produce dozens of bestsellers despite numerous rejections early in his career? The romantic myth of the inspired genius obscures the truth that most extraordinary work comes from ordinary people who refuse to quit. Turning pro means treating your growth not as a hobby that fits around life's edges, but as the central project of your existence. When you make this shift, everything changes. Not because your circumstances have, but because your relationship to them has. This mindset revolution isn't about positive thinking or simplistic self-help mantras. It's a fundamental rewiring of how you perceive your place in the world and your capacity to shape it. The external barriers are real, but they're not insurmountable. History shows us repeatedly that when enough individuals change how they think, the world changes in response. Your liberation begins between your ears. The question is, are you ready to challenge everything you've been taught about what's possible? Understanding The problem and adopting the right mindset are crucial, but they're not enough. Transformation requires action, specific strategic action that compounds over time. The good news? While everyone's path will differ, certain principles reliably separate those who escape the average trap from those who remain stuck in it. These aren't secrets. They're simply patterns observed across countless success stories that most people fail to implement consistently. Let's examine the blueprint. First, skill stacking. In an era where specialized knowledge is increasingly automated or outsourced, the real advantage goes to those who combine multiple competencies into unique value propositions. Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert, famously attributes his success not to being the best at any one thing, but to being good at several: cartooning, writing, business insight. This principle applies universally. The programmer who understands psychology gains an edge over those who just code. The tradesperson who masters marketing stands out from competitors who don't. The key is identifying complementary skills that amplify each other's value and systematically developing them. Unlike traditional education's linear approach, this strategy recognizes that intersections between fields are where true innovation happens. In practical terms, this means dedicating consistent time to skill acquisition with an eye toward how different abilities might combine to create unique opportunities. Next, financial fluency. The modern economy is designed to keep people in cycles of debt and consumption. Breaking free requires understanding money at a deeper level than most are taught. This doesn't mean becoming a Wall Street expert, but rather mastering basic principles like cash flow management, asset acquisition, and the difference between good debt that makes you money versus bad debt that costs you money. Consider the story of Robert Kiyosaki, who transformed his financial future by learning these principles after observing how his poor dad, his biological father, highly educated but financially struggling, and rich dad, a friend's father, with less formal education but greater financial acumen, approached money differently. Financial fluency enables you to make money work for you rather than perpetually working for money, a fundamental shift that creates space for pursuing meaningful work rather than just survival jobs. Perhaps the most underrated success factor is network effects. In our hyper-connected world, your net worth is increasingly tied to your network. This doesn't mean superficial networking or collecting LinkedIn connections, but rather cultivating genuine relationships with people who challenge and elevate you. PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel observes that great businesses are often built around core groups of talented individuals who worked together before. The same principle applies to personal success. Surrounding yourself with ambitious, capable people creates compounding opportunities that isolated effort never could. The practical implication? Be intentional about who you allow into your inner circle. Seek out mentors, collaborators, and peers who inspire growth. Contribute value to these relationships without immediate expectation of return. Over time, these connections become the invisible scaffolding supporting your ascent. Another critical component, personal branding. In an attention economy, those who can effectively communicate their value prosper. This isn't about empty self-promotion, but about developing the ability to articulate what makes your contribution unique. Gary Vaynerchuk transformed his family's liquor store into a national brand by recognizing early the power of digital platforms to amplify his message. Today, whether you're an entrepreneur, freelancer, or corporate employee, your ability to clearly convey your strengths and vision dramatically impacts your opportunities. This means developing basic communication skills, maintaining a professional online presence, and learning to tell your story compellingly. In a noisy world, those who can cut through the clutter gain disproportionate advantage. Underlying all these strategies is one non-negotiable: health optimization. Energy, focus, and resilience are the fuel for any meaningful endeavor. Yet modern lifestyles systematically undermine these fundamentals through poor nutrition, inadequate sleep, chronic stress, and sedentary habits. High performers across fields, from Arianna Huffington advocating for sleep reform after her exhaustion-induced collapse to Tim Ferriss experimenting with optimized nutrition and exercise protocols, recognized that peak performance begins with physical well-being. This isn't about vanity or extreme biohacking, but about making consistent choices that sustain your energy and cognitive function. When your body operates at peak capacity, every other aspect of your life benefits. The compounding returns of daily health habits are among the highest investments you can make. Execution requires systems, not just motivation. The most successful people don't rely on willpower. They build structures that make desired behaviors inevitable. James Clear's Atomic Habits philosophy captures this perfectly. Small, consistent actions compounded over time yield extraordinary results. In practice, this means creating routines, eliminating friction points from important tasks, and designing environments that support rather than undermine your goals. Cal Newport's concept of deep work, focused, distraction-free periods of high-value creation exemplifies this approach applied to professional productivity. The key insight? Lasting change comes not from dramatic, one-off efforts, but from embedding small improvements into your daily rhythms until they become automatic. Finally, embracing the long game. In our instant gratification culture, we dramatically underestimate what's possible with sustained effort over years. Consider that Warren Buffett made 99% of his wealth after age 50, or that Julia Child published her first cookbook at 50, launching a legendary second career. The obsession with overnight success stories obscures the reality that most meaningful achievements are marathons, not sprints. This long-term perspective provides immunity against discouragement when results don't appear immediately. It allows for necessary pivots and iterations without abandoning the broader vision. Practically, this means setting ambitious long-term goals while focusing on daily progress, tracking leading indicators, actions within your control, rather than lagging indicators, external outcomes, and cultivating patience as a strategic advantage rather than a weakness. This blueprint isn't theoretical. It's being implemented right now by individuals worldwide who refuse to accept the shrinking horizons offered to the average person. They're the immigrants building businesses in new countries, the self-taught coders creating innovative apps, the blue-collar workers acquiring lucrative trades, the artists finding global audiences online. None of them have perfect circumstances. All face obstacles. What separates them is the consistent application of these principles over time. Your path won't look identical to anyone else's, but the underlying patterns remain constant. The system wants you to believe change requires permission or luck. The truth, it requires strategy and persistence. The average life isn't your destiny. It's just someone else's plan for you. The moment you start executing your own plan is the moment everything changes. The tools exist. The choice is yours. Will you remain part of the crisis, or will you become part of the solution? History favors those bold enough to act. Where will you stand?